Okay, so today I am going to teach you, or going to discuss with you, how to properly perform the power snatch. It is a complex movement. It's a very quick movement. It takes the weight from the floor all the way overhead. It's a very rapid movement that involves a lot of muscle groups. It involves a lot of joints. And it's really difficult to perform due to the speed, the sequence, the timing that is necessary to ensure that there is no injuries. So if it's not executed properly, then there's a high risk of injury. Therefore, it's really important with a move like the power snatch that an individual does get some sort of education or training before doing it. So in addition to the proper form and techniques associated with the power snatch, we're also going to talk about a couple of training techniques that might help you obtain the proper form and perform a very consistent power snatch. So first is going to be freezing degrees of freedom. Freezing degrees of freedom takes the lift and it breaks it down into smaller parts. And with these smaller parts, we're going to freeze certain parts of the movement in order to work on others and correctly perform those little pieces that make up the larger movement. So for the power snatch, some of the things that we could freeze are the deadlift, or we can work on the deadlift just using that lower body and that slow movement, that rapid movement. Slow movement up, rapid movement from knees to hips. We could work on that high pull where all we're moving is that upper body to get that movement feeling right before we add in the weight, before we add in, the jump, before we add in anything else. And I'll show you how we're going to do that a little bit later in this demonstration. But the other thing that we're going to talk about is feedback. Now, feedback is crucial in all skill acquisition, no matter the level of athlete, no matter the difficulty of the skill, because feedback comes in all forms. It comes from us, it comes from other people, and feedback really tells us what we're doing in comparison to what we're supposed to be doing. So, the three types of feedback that we're going to talk about are internal feedback, proprioception, and external feedback. So first of all, internal feedback is triggered by a feeling associated with the physical movement inside of our bodies. Generally, during performance, it is noted and reflected upon after performance. So athletes will perform whether they're hitting a baseball or performing a lift, and they'll feel something that either feels really, really good, or they'll feel something that doesn't feel so good. And at that point, they make a note of it and they come back later and they're like, what was I supposed to do? What is the proper movement? And then how do I make it right? What did I do and how do I fix it? Or what do I need to keep doing because that felt really good? So one example of this is if you're doing the squat. If you're holding your bar on the back, so you've got your back bar and you're coming down and you're only coming to here each time, and you know that you have the flexibility and the mobility to come a full squat and break that plane, I often have that issue where I will finish a squat and be like, not quite low enough. So I just fix it on the next repetition. It's not a big deal, and I've taken my feedback and used it because I have knowledge of that lift. So that is a type of feedback that we use when we are further in our performance, when our education isn't so much like teacher to student, practice, practice, practice. It's more that we have the flow and we're in the associative and the autonomous stages of learning. Proprioception is the awareness and the positioning of your body. So knowing how you're standing, how you're moving, what is happening during all of these lifts, all of these performances, and being able to take that and create good habits because you know where your body is, you know where your body is supposed to be, and that in turn triggers that internal feedback. The third type of feedback that we'll talk about is external feedback. And external feedback is just like it sounds. It comes from an outside source. So that could be during or after performance, whichever is most safe for what you're doing. If you're playing baseball, you may not even hear it if it happens during the performance, but your coach is sure going to tell you about it after the game. If you're in the middle of a lift that goes overhead, probably not the best time is in the middle of the lift for your coach to say, hey, stop. Because you could hurt yourself, you could hurt others. So it's just knowledge of what you're doing, and they'll know when to tell you to stop and talk about it. And so that, like I said, often comes from a coach or your lifting partner. If you don't have somebody, stand near a full-length mirror, use your cell phone, video yourself, play it back in slow motion, because if we're playing it at full speed, you're not going to see the things like fully extending your hips during power clean, or making sure you get that high pull during the snatch. Those are things that are hard to notice if it's in full speed. But when you slow it down, you realize those small little pieces that are key in making the movement safe and effective aren't there. So, for example, for my power clean, I had trouble fully extending my hips, so my coach made me slowly start the hang and make sure that I push my hips out, because I was dropping under it before I fully extended, before I pulled up that bar, because it was easier. It was a shorter distance to lift. I was able to lift more weight, but I wasn't fully completing the lift properly. So because she was telling me and I still wasn't getting it, she pulled out her phone, videoed, we watched it in slow motion, and she had me follow along with my PVC pipe, where I was coming to about here, and instead of pushing out and thrusting my hips under my body, I was stopping here and muscling it up to make it easier for me, which is not necessarily the safest thing to do. So using her feedback along with that video and following along, I was able to build a deeper understanding of the lift. I was able to teach my body, so I had to go through that little hip thrust into high pull multiple times to really build that knowledge for myself to keep going back to that. So moving into ways that we're going to teach this movement. So we're going to start with either a PVC pipe, a light pole, an empty training bar. I unfortunately don't have one, so I'm going to use this shortened bar that I use for stretching. And we're going to rehearse the movements. This allows us to repeat the movements multiple times without reaching exhaustion, because once we're exhausted, we generally don't perform the movements well anyway. This helps us to repetition. This helps us to repeat the movement over and over, and repetition helps us to build that muscle memory. And once we build muscle memory, we'll have an awareness of where our body's supposed to be, how it's supposed to move, that proprioception, which triggers our internal feedback during performance. And it also gives us a chance for the coach or whoever we're training with to give us that external feedback. So we get all of those things along with building that movement in our mind and how we're going to perform it. So one way that we could do this is if you step up to a bar, and the first thing you want to work on is your grip. So you need to, the best way is pick up the bar, and if it hits right about your hip hinge, that's where you want to hold it. So that's where my hands would sit on this bar. And I'm going to be in an overhanded grip with my thumb tucked. Once I've got that, I've got my grip down. The next thing I need to think about is my stance. So my feet are going to be right about shoulder width apart. I'm going to push my hips backwards. I'm going to arch my back slightly, pinch my shoulders, push my chest out, and I'm going to go ahead and squat it all the way down as if it was on the ground. So this is about where we would start if we had a barbell. So up against our shins or fairly close to, because this is a movement that stays close to the body. I'm going to show you from the side. So you're not quite down in that full squat stance, you're about halfway. For the deadlift, we're going to slowly come up and then quickly thrust your hips. So we stand up, quick. And once you've got that, so you're standing at this point. So generally you'll do that 3 to 5 times. Make sure your coach sees you, sees what you're doing, and you're performing it correctly. And then we're going to freeze our lower body. We're just going to move our arms. At this point in the lift, we would be doing that jumping motion. However, first we want to make sure we get that high pull. So it's a quick pull, close to the body. So hands are still wide, elbows go up and out. We can add that with our deadlift, or we can start at the high hang position. So it's a quick with the jump. And then once you're at that top, the bar is going to go weightless, and you're going to let it float above, and you're going to drop and catch and stand up. So we would repeat those different motions. We would rehearse over and over to kind of get that repetition, that practice in. And then we would grab our barbell. Unfortunately, I don't have plates, but we would start in that position and we would snatch and bring it back down. So that is the power snatch with the freezing degrees of freedom, allowing us to freeze parts of that movement and work on that deadlift, moving those legs properly, pushing through our hips and our quads. We get the chance to lift with our arms, not moving those bottom half. And then we talked about feedback. Thank you.